I'd been driving for hours. It was dark and late, and torrents of rain pelted the windscreen too fast for the wipers. I glanced down at the speedo, which was now registering 90, but the car was no longer speeding along narrow country lanes. We were now gliding over a vast, smooth black lake, and instead of the sound of a straining engine, we skimmed the shiny surface in pure, virgin silence. I made checks on my silent travelling companion by means of the internal mirror, when 3 calm, sibilant words came from behind me, and for a moment I wondered myself whether the car had the means by which to cease moving anymore. My speculation was cut short by the sudden and blinding appearance of a brilliantly lit forecourt, a mass of rapidly pulsating, dense yellow light, which the car flew to like a moth. We finally came to a halt after hours of careful manoeuvring between a pair of white lines in a huge deserted car park. We both got out and went over to the entrance. It seemed peculiar that all but one of the tables were occupied, considering the car park was empty. Louise seemed not to notice and whispered, "I won't be a moment." I went over to the counter and spent a ridiculous amount of time trying to decide what to get her. Eventually I bought 2 coffees and a cream bun type thing from a child who put the money I handed it between 2 bun halves on display. That only available table was unfortunately out in the middle of the aisle, but here I sat, and from this unpleasant vantage point I insecurely surveyed the cafe. How hideous everyone was. Distorted, defective, diseased. A foul tang on my lips told me that disinfectant fought with the stench of decomposition. No one spoke in that place. No one looked at anyone else. In front of each corpse was a plate, a bowl of soup, a wax cup of tea or coffee. A wispy line of steam ghosting a deathly face here or there, smoke falling lifelessly from dead lips. That place should have disgusted me, but I felt quite at home in it. But where was Louise? Her coffee was getting cold. She emerged from a swing door at the far end of the cafe, stood there for a while looking around. She hadn't noticed me, which was curious considering I was clearly visible. I tried to wave my arm. The thing flew violently the wrong way, knocking Louise's cake off its plate. I tried to stand up, but wasn't even able to slide my feet from under the table. Louise looked delirious now. Her eyes were flitting from corner to corner, even to the ceiling. And as a last resort, I shouted at the top of my voice neither her name nor anything of any relevance. Suddenly the main door opened again, and a tall Latin-looking man walked over to Louise. He seemed at first sight to be terribly ill. Later I realized it was his exceedingly healthy looks which I had mistaken for disease. can't remember much more. I felt remote, isolated. I sipped automatically at the tasteless liquid in my cup, and I noticed a small black bug which appeared and disappeared on the back of one finger. Eventually, when they'd gone, I stepped over Louise's crushed cake and went to the laboratory to verify my fears. I was at some initial stage of decomposition. My nose was black and fibrous, and a piece broke off when I touched it. My left eye was a grey, murky ball, oozing thick white pus from the inside corner, and on opening my mouth, one tooth readily fell out. The other remaining one I was able to work loose with the tip of my tongue. Once back in the car, a sense of overwhelming purpose took hold of me. The rain had stopped, and as I hurtled along the narrow country lanes, dawn was just visible at the far ends of the fields to my right. I had all the windows down, and the chilled morning air rinsed away the disease of the cafe and the memory of Louise. At the airport, I found myself walking for hours through a long fluorescent tube, void of human life and drenched in yellow. I began to run for fear of missing my plane, but I still had no idea where that plane was going to take me. The yellow tube rose and sank left and right, a twisted nightmare of futile escape. Eventually I did emerge, but I had no chance to think. All was mayhem. Cars crashing, mounting the curb, demolishing walls, buildings and other vehicles. People dead on the pavement. Massive three-tier buses thundering through anything in their paths. And then, with no warning, about 100 frantic passengers materialized from nowhere, rushing, colliding and screaming hysterically, sweeping me along with them. And we all spilled back down into that infernal yellow tube, like a human tidal wave. An air hostess walked gracefully up the tube, weaving her way casually between flying suitcases and passengers, inquiring as to whether anyone would like a drink. I was upside down and on collision course with the large trunk at the time, which some seconds later struck me in the pit of my stomach, just as I reached down for a glass off her tray. Everyone else had stabilized and was seated around a long table. For some reason, I was still airborne, and no one seemed to notice as my weightless bulk flew randomly overhead. The stewardess gazed upwards occasionally to check that everyone had come down, as if she had not expected me to stabilize in the first place. I began to master my weightless environment, and soon I was performing a masterpiece of modern aerial ballet. And of course they just loved the grand finale, during which I was enmeshed in my own finely spun web of blood, whereupon I fell to the ground. Everyone and everything else flew into the air at this moment, and all was chaos again as the huge fluorescent plane tilted on its nose and plummeted to earth. Mine was a VIP reception. For some reason, a crowd had gathered in the lobby, and as I walked towards the exit, they shuffled beside me in frantic little steps, as though bound together around the knees. All eyes were on me, glued to my every move. Cameras flashed, and intense facial expressions of anticipation told me that they were expecting me to produce some important document from a pocket which would alter their lives, if not life itself. And so to comply, I did. The important document was a gun, and the life changer a deadly accurate bullet which must have hit the ringleader because they all fell dead on the plush carpet. My exit was now gestured by officials who seemed anxious to protect my safe path from the terminal. A large wobbly man, probably a bodyguard, got stuck into swing doors behind me. I got into a waiting car and drove away through deserted streets. Dusty beige highways flanked on either side by long, low factories. Derelict works surrounded by high wire fences. I cruised along these fast, wide roads, and not once did I see another car or person. Behind one fence, which was possibly electrified, I saw the burnt-out carcasses of 2 Alsatians. A thick mist had descended and forced me to pull up. This was now breaking in places, and I could see what looked like huge cylindrical water towers built up on great iron girders. A mass of pipes, all varying diameters, which interlinked with one another via T-junctions where one wide tube would diverge into 2. A massive complex of ominous proportions was coming to life around me. And somewhere amidst that nightmare, my sister lived in marital harmony. Or so her letters had told me. I crossed the road and began to look for her house beneath the network of tanks and pipes, from which emanated 2 disturbing sounds. The first was a hissing scream, almost above audible range, like tons of steam escaping through a pinhole. The other was a deep sub-audio throb, which arrived through one's stomach via the ground. It was relentless, monotonous, and insanely powerful. I could see a house not far away, and when I reached it, I rang on a bell and my friend Mark opened the door. Something terrible had happened to him. In place of body and arms, there was a complex system of hydraulic joints, rigid metal girders, swivels and connecting rods. In the middle of this metal-framed torso was a small black cylinder with several transparent tubes connecting it to various parts of the hydraulic limbs. one larger pipe made its journey straight up to the base of his neck, and a bubble of black viscous liquid pulsated in it. This bubble obsessed me, and I surmised that Mark could only function as long as it continued to rise and sink in rapid succession. Mark looked unwell. His face was strained and pale, and his steps into the room had been cautious, though I could not tell whether his trousered lower half was mechanical or not. Occasional drips of black fluid were forming and falling from the bottom side of this cylinder. Mark was looking weaker and iller by the second. Perhaps he was unaware of the leak. I was trying to decide whether I should tell him when my sister came in through the front door and greeted us both busily yet amicably. I watched her dash over to Mark and gently dab at the base of the cylinder inside his frame. I resorted to pushing my tongue against the roots of my tooth, and at last I almost dislodged it. But it still hung in there, and amid sudden panic, I tried to push it firm back down onto my gum. But it had somehow twisted right round on itself and wouldn't sit neatly anymore. Eventually, I said goodbye and left. All life had been destroyed. The sky was a grey diffusion and ominously dark. The air was asphyxiating and stung the back of the throat at each intake of breath. There were no trees or bushes, no birds, no flowers, no people. Nothing but a blanket of grey dust lying in all directions as far as the eye could see. The only irregularity in this endless sea of powder was the occasional track of some military vehicle, certainly alien, probably seeking out the last survivors and annihilating them. In this new and terrifying world, only four things existed: the dark grey ground, the slightly lighter grey sky, the invisible enemy, and of course me. The tanks, I was pretty sure, went around in small convoys, sweeping across the desert in organized patterns, their sole aim to destroy all the last vestiges of life still remaining after whatever had just occurred. I knew what to expect. The horizon was probably distorted by dust particles. There would be no warning when they came. 1 second, alone and safe. The next, a huge thundering machine bearing down on me. At every step, the arid air tried to choke me. The thick layer of powder tried to swallow me. And for all I knew, the tank was 1 yard to my right, hidden in a vortex of distorted sound and light, about to roar into point-blank view at any second. The first day passed without event, but terror filled the ensuing night. Not the faintest sound came from anywhere to distract me from the imminent bursting of veins in my eardrums and the silent approach of military machinery in my imagination. Back on the outskirts of town, the streets were still deserted and dark. An arc of orange glowing sky defined the width of the city. In the distance, I heard eerie screams, infrequent and indistinct. I walked on a little more. Those two ominous sounds had familiarized themselves with sympathetic pitches in my stomach and inner ear. My senses seemed to shift onto a different plane, becoming remoter and almost alien from my body. Growing sensation of total control took over my subconscious. And with a carefully measured fuel consisting of the perfect mixture of concentration and relaxation, I started to accelerate upwards as though on a cushion of expanding foam, in the utter faith that I could fly. All too soon, a dread of sinking took over, and I began to gently come down from my elevation of bliss. And although I knew that it was the fear of sinking back to earth which was causing me to sink back to earth, it was too late. The reverse process was in motion, the concentration broken, the balance of energies toppled to the wrong side. For most of that night, I tried to recreate the experience, and repeatedly my hopes were dashed as I sat there and waited in vain for something to happen. And at every failed attempt, my flight lost more and more credibility, until there was nothing else to do but return to the din of everyday life